Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. I've been slowly collecting these TWSBI Eco pens, and now I've gathered up each of the nib sizes, and I'll finally get to test each nib size out in a series of different types of paper. I've inked all of these up with the same ink using this Waterman's Intense Black ink, so they are all inked up and ready to go. In order to get a good feel for how each of these pens functions, I'm going to try writing with them on a variety of papers. So first I'm going to try the Tomoe River paper here in my Hobonichi Techo. Next I'm going to try each of them out in my Rhodia dot pad. Then I'll test them out in my Scribbles That Matter. And finally I'll see how each of them writes in the Leuchtturm 1917. Alright, so let's start with the extra fine, and this is on the Tomoe River paper. And that's all the sizes on the Tomoe River paper. I'm going to go ahead and turn the page to see what kind of bleed through or shadowing I see. So I do see some shadowing, no bleed through though on the Tomoe River paper. Alright, so up next is the Rhodia dot pad. I'm going to start off with the extra fine. And let's see what the back looks like. So you can see that there's some ghosting, especially when you get down to the broad or the 1.1. But up here, when you stay with the extra fine or the fine, there's a little bit of ghosting if I look very hard and under these intense lights. But there's not too much if you're just looking at it under, say, a regular office light. Next up is my Leuchtturm 1917, and again I'm going to be starting with the extra fine. And let's see how it looks in the back of the page. As you can see, there's almost no ghosting, and I can't really see anything. Even, I guess if I really struggle, I can start to see the broad and maybe the stub nib as well. But you can see that there's pretty minimal ghosting and definitely no bleed through. And finally, here's my Scribbles That Matters notebook. We're going to start off again with the extra fine. As you can see, there is minimal ghosting, although you can see through, especially, oh, right there, I definitely see the ghosting now. If you push down, you can see some ghosting, and I am also under some intense lights, so that's probably contributing to why I can see through some of these pages, but it almost looks like the Leuchtturm is holding up better than the Scribbles That Matter when it comes to the TWSBI Eco. Let me go ahead and open that up to test that theory. No, I would say they're holding up about the same. I do see the same level of ghosting here with the leuchtturm that I'm seeing with the Scribbles That Matter. Let me go ahead and zoom you guys out. So right here is the Scribbles That Matter, and then here's the leuchtturm. So I can see some definite ghosting on both of them, but nothing too intrusive, nothing that would stop me from using these pens with these notebooks. So here was the Tomoe River paper. It was such a nice, smooth writing experience with the extra fine all the way down to the stub nib. There was almost no skipping. I don't think that there was any skipping at all. And the paper really held its own. This paper was able to withstand all of the nib sizes from extra fine all the way down to the stub nib, and you can see that although there is ghosting, there is no bleed through, and the writing experience on the Tomoe River paper was probably the smoothest of all of the papers that I tried today. The Rhodia was also a really nice experience, but as you can see here with the medium nib, I did have some skipping, and I also noticed that as soon as I closed the notebook, I did see that there was some transfer to this side of the paper, meaning that either the broad or the stub nib wasn't completely dry, and being a lefty, I do need things to be pretty quick drying. I do tend to write more carefully when I'm using a fountain pen, especially when I'm writing on silky paper like the Rhodia. But I did notice that although it was a fairly smooth writing experience, it was not as smooth as the Tomoe River paper, and it also took a little bit longer to dry. I don't know if I waited a little bit longer before closing the Tomoe River paper book that I was using, or if I closed this one too fast, but I do know that there's a difference, at least in my testing, with the Rhodia being or taking a little bit longer for the ink to dry. Next is my Leuchtturm 1917, and as you can see, I closed the paper too soon and I probably ran my hand across this bottom line where I used the stub nib, which is why I had some smudging there at the bottom. But you can see this paper also held its own very well with each of the fountain pens. Again, starting from the top with the extra fine and moving all the way down to the stub nib at the bottom, and there was fairly minimal ghosting here on the back. And here's how each of the papers compare. Here is the Leuchtturm 1917. Here's the Rhodia dot pad. Here's my Hobonichi Techo with Tomoe River paper. And here is the Scribbles That Matter notebook. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you the nib sizes. So this pastel blue is an extra fine. And here's the nib on that. Next up is the fine, and here's the nib on that. Here is the extra fine compared to the fine. Next up is the medium, and here's the medium nib. And here's how the medium nib on the right compares to the fine nib here on the left. Next up is the broad, and here is how the nib looks for the broad. And here is how the broad nib compares to the medium. Finally, we have the stub or the 1.1, and here is how the nub looks on that. Here's how the 1.1 compares to the broad. And there's the medium. There's the fine. And lastly, the extra fine. Overall, I was really impressed with the writing experience of all of the nibs. If you're looking at this pen and you're trying to decide what nib size to choose, I really think it's personal preference. I really enjoyed the smoothness of a wider nib, so I think that I enjoy writing with the medium and the broad the most. But something else to consider is whether or not you're going to be using your pens for personal use, where you have some control over the paper and you can use it on a leuchtturm or a Rhodia or a Scribbles That Matter, or if you're going to be using it primarily at work. So this one is the extra fine, and I keep that one with me at work. I use it to sign documents, irrespective of the paper quality, because it's pretty good at not bleeding through or feathering even when I'm dealing with inexpensive copy paper at work. But I also keep my medium, and I use that to write in my Hobonichi Techo, which has Tomoe River paper, and I really like kind of the ease of just writing things quickly. I also leave that book open on my desk, so dry time isn't as much of a concern for me. So I hope this video provided you with enough information for you to make a decision on which TWSBI Eco nib would be best to meet your needs. And that's about it for today. Until next time, guys, I hope this video brought you some utility and joy.